Hello, and thank you for joining me at Spooky Reviews. I'm the Ghostess, and whenever I get asked what my favorite horror movie of all time is, I hem and haw over what's the right answer. But when it comes down to the one I've seen the most, loved the longest, think is both a super entertaining movie and a fantastically crafted film, and would definitely take to any desert island I happen to end up on, there's really only one right answer: Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. But what makes The Shining so great? And what is the movie really about? And what the hell is up with that dog man? Well, in this special animated edition of Spooky Reviews, I'm about to traverse the labyrinth of cinematographic splendor and bonkers film theories that make up the wonderful world of The Shining. The movie follows the Torrance family, former school teacher and aspiring author Jack, played by Jack Nicholson, his wife Wendy, played by Shelley Duvall, and their psychically inclined son, Danny, played by Danny Lloyd, who head up to the luxurious Overlook Hotel, isolated in the Colorado Rockies, to act as winter caretakers. While touring the building, Danny encounters the hotel's cook, Dick Halloran, played by Scatman Crothers, who is psychic in the same way as Danny, calling their ability Shining, and encourages the boy to contact him if they come across any trouble. As winter approaches, Jack becomes more and more entranced by the hotel, depicted in a hypnotic, numb awe, and flies into rages by any interruptions. Meanwhile, the hotel's haunted nature reveals itself more and more to Danny, focused mostly on the previous caretaker's murdered daughters, depicted as a set of twins, and an ominous doom lurking behind room 237. After Danny enters the mysterious room, he exits with strangulation bruises in a catatonic state, which Wendy initially blames on Jack. After raging about the false accusations to a ghostly bartender, Jack gets sent to investigate the room and encounters a seductive bathing beauty who transforms into a waterlogged hag, but he gaslights his wife into thinking the boy's injuries must be self-inflicted. Danny contacts Mr. Halloran with his Shine, who then travels from his Miami vacation back to the hotel when he's unable to contact anyone there, bringing with him a snowcat to help the family flee. Wendy discovers that the novel Jack has been writing so diligently is actually a single phrase repeated on hundreds of pages, ending with a confrontation where she knocks him unconscious and locks him in the dry goods pantry. When he comes to, he threateningly informs her that he has already destroyed their means of communication and escape. The ghosts negotiate letting Jack out in exchange for his family's lives, leading him to axe his way toward them while Danny escapes through the window. Fortunately for Wendy, but unfortunately for Mr. Halloran, the man arrives during the encounter and ends up axed by the axe. Jack chases Danny out into the snowy hedge maze, while Wendy is forced to confront the hotel's haunting through a series of ghostly encounters. Danny outwits his father in the maze, using his footprints to trick him into passing Danny by, and then following his own footprints back to the exit. Wendy and Danny flee the mountain via snowcat, and Jack freezes to death in the maze. The final shot slow zooms on one of the hotel's historical photos that now mysteriously contains Jack at the front of the crowd. While The Shining is a fantastic film, it isn't exactly a perfect adaptation. It's based on a novel written by master of horror Stephen King, his third novel after Carrie and Salem's Lot, originally published in 1977, and there are some pretty distinct differences between his vision and Stanley Kubrick's. Some of the more noticeable differences include the infamous Room 217 gets transformed into Room 237. The family's red VW Beetle got a coat of yellow paint, and Jack's weapon of choice, originally a roque mallet, became an axe, making his mania far more fatal. The film primarily uses the hotel's manager, Stuart Ullman, for exposition, acting as a human American flag that whitewashes the hotel's unseemly history. In the novel, he's a bit more of an arrogant antagonist, with the very first line describing him as an officious little prick in Jack's mind. The film skips over an entire subplot about Jack discovering a wasp's nest outside the hotel that Danny decides he wants to keep, only for it to spring back to life and sting the boy mercilessly. The novel contains a malevolent menagerie of topiary animals that got reworked into a hedge maze. The maze became so quintessential to The Shining's legacy that the Stanley Hotel, the real-life hotel in Estes Park that inspired Stephen King's novel, started growing a hedge maze simply because so many tourists kept asking where it was. And while the film leaves the Overlook to haunt another day, Stephen King ended his with a giant explosion. However, King's biggest beef with Kubrick's interpretation came down to the portrayal of Jack himself. While the character of Jack Torrance in the novel is a complex portrait of an alcoholic struggling to restore trust with his family as his inner demons drag him backward into his vices, the 1980 movie's version, as portrayed by Jack Nicholson, is a white-knuckled fist of rage bubbling under the surface from minute one. There's a near manic level of tension in every line read, which occasionally slacks into a detached numbness, just so it can ramp back up again. This key difference in the characterization is a huge part of why I interpret the novel differently from the film, despite them having very similar stories, and why I don't think it's particularly fair to use King's world building to interpret Kubrick's world, which is also why I won't be including Dr. Sleep in my analysis. As much as I love Stephen King's work, it has very rarely been adapted to the screen successfully without breaking heavily from what he actually wrote. I think the literal imagery he creates often works better in the reader's imagination than in a shot-for-shot recreation. And if you don't believe me, check out the 1997 miniseries Stephen King's The Shining, which he made because he never really cared for Kubrick's interpretation. Starring Rebecca De Mornay and Steven Weber, the miniseries suffers from too much tell, not enough show, and way too low a budget to pull off anything that rivals Kubrick's interpretation. What I think Kubrick's adaptation does so much better than King's is capturing the feeling of reading the novel. The book jumps in and out of characters' heads, merging with the hotel's ghosts and flashbacks, painting these vivid portraits of characters isolated together in a haunted hotel. The movie does this through expert cinematography, language shots that slowly dissolve into each other for surreal juxtaposition, and tracking shots that emphasize a sense of paranoia. The complex and sometimes illogical setting reinforces the maze imagery, as the characters seem just as uncertain what's around every corner as the audience. The hotel's design scheme mixes vivid geometric prints designed by David Hicks with appropriative Western motifs that make parts of the hotel seem like completely different locations from one another. All of this is matched perfectly by Wendy Carlos's score, and together create a tension so palpable it's grabbing me by the throat and pulling me back into room 237. This movie is 100% atmosphere, a 13 out of 13 on my spooky scale for its technical prowess. Far too many movies suffer from over-explaining their scares, and in an over 2-hour runtime, it doesn't spell out exactly what's going on, so that struggle to wrap your head around what you're looking at amplifies the horror without detracting from the plot. One of the things I love about Stanley Kubrick as a filmmaker is that he was greatly inspired by the books he read. He started composing A Clockwork Orange in his head before he was even done reading it. And he ends up taking larger plot points from the novels and condensing them down into something that visually represents the same level of insanity. For example, there's one scene in the book where Danny encounters a dogman ghost. There was a man on all fours halfway down the corridor between him and the stairs. Danny froze. The man looked up at him. His eyes were tiny and red. He was dressed in some sort of silvery spangled costume. A dog costume, Danny realized. Protruding from the rump of this strange creation was a long and floppy tail with a puff on the end. A zipper ran up the back of the costume to the neck. The man's mouth and chin and cheeks were smeared with blood. He began to growl at Danny. He was grinning, but the growl was real. It was deep in his throat, a chilling, primitive sound. His teeth were also stained red. "Let me by," Danny said. "I'm gonna eat you, little boy," the dogman answered, and suddenly a fusillade of barks came from his grinning mouth. They were human imitations, but the savagery in them was real. There was a mixture of scotch and champagne on his breath. Danny flinched back, but didn't run. "Let me by." "Not by the hair of my chinny chin chin," the dogman replied. His small red eyes were fixed attentively on Danny's face. He continued to grin. "I'm gonna eat you up, little boy, and I think I'll start with your plump little cock." He began to prance skittishly forward, making little leaps and snarling. Danny's nerve broke. He fled back into the short hallway that led to their quarters, looking back over his shoulders. "Get it up!" the drunken dogman cried out from around the corner. His voice was both violent and despairing. "Get it up, Harry, you bitch bastard. I don't care how many casinos and airlines and movie companies you own. I know what you like in the privacy of your own home. Get it up. I'll huff and I'll puff until Harry Derwent's all blown down." He ended with a long chilling howl that seemed to turn into a scream of rage and pain just before it dwindled off. Later, we get more context for this scene as Jack is partying with the ghosts in the ballroom. Jack witnesses the hotel's owner, Harry DeWent, treating a dog-costumed man like an animal, to the amusement of the crowd. "Isn't Harry a card?" Jack's dance partner asked him, pressing close again. "Everyone says so. He's AC/DC, you know. Poor Roger's only DC. He spent a weekend with Harry in Cuba once, months ago. Now he follows Harry everywhere, wagging his little tail behind him." She giggled. "But of course Harry never goes back for seconds. not on his DC side anyway, and Roger is just wild. Harry told him if he came to the masked ball as a doggy, a cute little doggy, he might reconsider. Side note, AC/DC is my new favorite euphemism for bisexual. And Stanley Kubrick took all of this and condensed it down into a single shot, while Wendy goes through her final girl ghost gauntlet. And the lack of context makes it all the more disturbing, leaving those who had not read the book completely baffled by what this image was supposed to mean. And this perfectly encapsulates the insanity that the characters are experiencing as they encounter these same ghosts in the story. Kubrick is known for relentlessly pursuing his artistic vision, shooting endless takes of even the most mundane actions until his actors are exhausted and psychologically tortured, and even steps in to personally face items on set. While this makes his artwork incredibly impressive, it leads to what I like to call the illusion of depth, where an artist's dedication to crafting their universe is so solid that anything and everything is interpreted as a conscious decision, as though they are incapable of having accidents or continuity errors. Because the author is so meticulous and has so many things hidden in their work, the audience is projecting authorial intent into whatever they dig up. It's the same reason Rick and Morty's hardcore fans focus on even the slightest pieces of information as some secret to unlocking character canon, even when something might just be a throwaway line played for laughs. With Kubrick's reputation, this has opened The Shining up to countless fan theories, many of which you can find on YouTube or in the documentary Room 237, where several steadfast Shining film enthusiasts spell out their theories about what The Shining is really about. While it's not a really high recommendation for me as a documentary goes, it is interesting to get insight into different people's perspectives as they fixate on different aspects of the film's symbolism. A lot of the prominent theories pose bizarre questions. Was The Shining Stanley Kubrick's coded confession that he faked the moon landing for the US government after they witnessed the brilliance of 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is based mostly on Danny's Apollo sweater and the presence of Tang in the dry goods stockroom? Or is that stockroom's Calumet baking powder, the Native American themed decor, and Jack's Kipling reference to the white man's burden make it a condemnation of manifest destiny and the white man's destruction of Native American tribes? Or was the German-branded typewriter hinting at a Holocaust allegory? Or did the maze imagery make it a horror retelling of Theseus and the Minotaur? Were the continuity errors intentional hints at the character's distorted reality? Were the adaptation's differences from its source material a way of sticking it to Stephen King, or were they coded messages? Did he superimpose his face in the clouds over the opening credits, or hide subliminal messages in the smallest corners of the screen? Is the movie supposed to be played in reverse, or forward and reversed simultaneously? I've seen the hotel interpreted as hell, or purgatory, or a government mind control testing site a la MK Ultra. The story might be taking place in Wendy's mind, or Jack's novel, or is Danny the evil mastermind controlling the hotel with his shine? Jack could be suppressing his homosexual desires, could be possessed by the devil, a reincarnation of a previous caretaker, or a far more abusive father than the dialogue will lead you to believe. While many of these theories make sense when matched with the interpreter's evidence, I don't actually think these pieces reflect what Kubrick was trying to say. What I find delightfully absurd about all their certainty and evidence is that none of them are really right, because there is no right way to interpret a work of art. While the artist obviously informs the artwork, the audience controls for themselves what it means to them, even if the artist is explicit in their visions, which Kubrick was not. As meticulous as he wasn't the Zodiac killer, sending out cryptic messages to be decoded with only one right answer. He's a filmmaker, creating a piece of art that is open to interpretation. Even my own interpretations aren't any more accurate, but that's the joy of being a fan. And I love that Kubrick allowed his work to take on a life of its own in the imagination of the viewers. It makes The Shining so much more engaging than a horror movie where every detail and backstory is painstakingly spelled out, and why its horror lingers so much longer on my mind. Honestly, I notice something different every time I watch The Shining. My most recent rewatch for this video focused more closely on the family's history. One of the few pieces of backstory we get about the Torrance family is told to us twice. Once by Wendy at the beginning of the film while she's talking to a doctor about Danny, and once again later in the film when Jack is talking to Lloyd, the bartender. Wendy explains that Jack once dislocated Danny's arm in a drunken rage, her version heavily downplaying the incident as an accident and putting a positive spin on it as a catalyst for Jack to stop drinking 5 months ago. While Jack tells the story, he mimics some of her verbiage, but with an elevated hostility, referring back to how Wendy will never let him live it down, and that it happened 3 goddamn years ago. But the dynamic we see between Jack and Wendy doesn't ever hint that she would have the gall to harp on him about just about anything. She seems constantly in a state of positive spin, seemingly walking on eggshells around Jack, especially after he tells her to get the fuck out while he's writing. She seems a little thrown off by this, but doesn't say word one to him like he's really acting that outside of the norm. Time really jumps around a lot in the story, with arbitrary title cards telling us the days of the week coming across disorienting, which is contradictory to what a title card is for. How I've always interpreted the film is that the haunted hotel is a sort of realm outside of linear time and space. The actual reason for the hotel's winter closure is because the effect is particularly powerful during the winter season, thus the winter photos hung on the wall and the skiing poster in the game room. Jack Torrance is fated to die in the hotel because he had, in a sense, always been a part of it. He speaks several times about the hotel feeling very familiar to him, like he's been there before, and how he wants to be there forever. Forever meaning past, present, and future. It's why the woman in the bathtub transforms from a young, fresh-faced beauty into a rotting corpse, and why Wendy stumbles upon cobwebbed skeletons that can be matched to the party guests in the gold ballroom. The hotel creates its own retroactive continuity, absorbing Jack into its history after he dies, as shown in the final shot of Jack at the 4th of July ball, when Delbert Grady explains that Jack has always been the caretaker there, and that Grady himself had always been there. He's not lying. Jack's central position in the party photo indicates he has some level of importance to the hotel. I think all the ghostly employees, Grady, Lloyd the bartender, and Jack, are employees who died in the hotel, while the gold ballroom's party guests are made up of all the hotel guests who died there over the years, or will die there at some point in the future, trapped in a space that's displaced from time to spend eternity in an endless party. But again, that's just my humble interpretation. I by no means think it was what Kubrick actually intended. It's just so fascinating to think about, which makes the movie live on in my mind rent-free forever. And ever. And ever. And ever. For anyone still watching, thank you so much for indulging this animated experiment and my personal love letter to The Shining. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe, and let me know in the comments below what you think about The Shining, or if there's another feature you'd like to see an animated breakdown of. I will try to keep posting at least every couple of weeks, so join me next time for another spooky review. See you then, and boo for now. Midnight with the stars and you. Midnight and a rendezvous. Your eyes held a message tender, saying I surrender all my love to you. Midnight brought a sweet romance, I know, all my whole life through. I'll be remembering you, whatever else I do. Midnight with the stars and you.